Hi, I'm Holly from the blog fullflourishing.com, where I like to talk about living a life of intentionality, and today I'm going to be sharing how our family approaches reading. I get lots of questions from friends and some followers on Instagram whenever I share posts about the different chapter books and the different things that we're reading. I just get questions about how do we get our kids to sit there and read the chapter books, because they're so young. They're 3.5 and 17 months. So I just thought I would just take a little bit of time to share how our family approaches reading. So if you are interested in seeing more about that, then just keep on watching. So I thought I'd share a little bit of backstory just in case you are new to my channel and my blog. So I'm a mom of 2 boys, ages 3.5 and almost 18 months, I guess 17 months right now. And they love reading every day during breakfast. We do a devotional and we read from the Bible, and if we're really heavy into our chapter book, we might read a chapter. But usually during lunch every day when we're at home, we'll read a chapter or so from our chapter book, and then during dinner, since Daddy's home, we'll usually start off dinner and Mama will stuff her mouth with food. And then as I can see the attention is starting to wane, maybe the conversation is starting to wane, the boys are still hungry and are still wanting and needing to eat, but they're just kind of like in that point of time where they might start getting a little mischievous during dinner. I'll pull out the chapter book and it really helps them to focus their minds while they finish eating. So I follow a lady named Elsie at Farmhouse Schoolhouse, and she has 4 boys, and I started following her just before Samson was 2, maybe he was like 1.5, and she would just share the different books that her boys were reading, and I just began thinking, like, maybe, you know, maybe Samson, because at the time I was pregnant, maybe Samson is ready for like a chapter book. I mean, I couldn't envision him sitting there and just listening to me read, but I thought, I don't know, let me try it. So what I did is I went and I looked on my bookshelf, and I was trying to find like a chapter book, and I didn't have a lot of, I didn't want twaddle, as Charlotte Mason calls it. I didn't want just like junky kids chapter books. I wanted something that I was interested in, something that I would like to read. So I was looking around at, on our shelf, and I pulled off one of my favorites from childhood called My Side of the Mountain. And I mean, it's definitely a chapter book. It does have a few pictures, a few drawings. It's by Jean Craighead George, which is actually a female author. But so I pulled it out and I was like, okay, we'll just see. And I started reading, and the imagery in this book is just full of it's nature imagery. And because we're in nature a lot, and because our kitchen table is situated right by a window outside, it just captivated his mind, and you could just see like the images forming in his brain, and he was just so excited to be listening to this book. And I only read until I could see that he wasn't interested anymore. So the first day, I think it was like 2 or 3 pages, and the writing is pretty small, but it was just like 2 or 3 pages, and that was it. But then it started getting to where it was like a whole chapter, and then like maybe a chapter and a half, and we would talk about it. And he doesn't really now at 3.5 remember, you know, that much from this book, which is fine because we'll just read it again. I love it, but he did remember and recall the information, not all the details, but to this day there's specific aspects of the book that he still remembers. Like he'll still, when you see a falcon in the sky, he'll say, look, that's Frightful. But I don't know if he remembers who Frightful is totally in relation to this story. But anyways, so that was the first one. The second one, I was like, okay, this is going great, let's do another one. So I looked on my shelf again, and I got Where the Red Fern Grows. And you know, Where the Red Fern Grows is like pretty tiny writing too, and so sometimes, you know, he wasn't as interested. Maybe it's like 2 pages, and sometimes it would be a whole chapter. It would just depend. So now we are reading through the Little House series, which is, you know, as far as like a reading level goes, it's, you know, a lot easier of a reading level than these books. But those are the books we're going through now. I think we'll do Winnie the Pooh in the future. We have tried twice to do like made for children chapter books, and one of the ones I chose was kind of like a pirate one, which I think was a bad choice because he'd never been to the beach, and so he doesn't really have a concept of pirates or anything like that, or the ocean, and so he was just like bored. He wasn't interested, and I wasn't interested either. So we abandoned that book. And of course, we try not to abandon books, but I was like, this is not very good. And then the next book we tried was also, it was a Christian written for children chapter book, but we just weren't into it. And it was around that time that I started studying Charlotte Mason, and I learned the word twaddle, and she talks about twaddle for the mind is just like, you know, books that are out there. I mean, you know what they are. They're just books that just don't have a lot of depth to them. They're supposed to be entertaining or whatever. A lot of times they're commercialized. They're about like characters that are in movies or TV shows or things. The question is like, how do you get your kids to sit there and listen to books? That's the question I get. Well, number one, I choose a time. And I started it with Samson. I choose a time that their hands are busy. So I'm not expecting them to just sit there and like look at me and stare at me or stare off into space while I read. So usually it's lunchtime or dinner time, which it does help with the meal times. And yes, I have to kind of eat fast, or I eat in between reading or whatever. But I'm enjoying reading the books too, so I don't mind it. And then the other thing is, you know, we are a screen-free house, so the kids aren't watching movies or iPads or anything like this. So this is their excitement. This is their entertainment. You know, before people had screens, people would retire to a sitting room in the evenings, or they would go to the family room together, and people would read out a Bible, or they'd read out of a book, and you might sew or knit while someone is doing that. So that's kind of how we approach it too. We don't do screens, and so their minds are ready for this rich, beautiful dialogue that's happening in the books and this imagery. Another thing that we do, so when Jericho was a newborn and an infant up until around like 6 months, we could still read at the table. But then I found that Jericho was getting very vocal, and it was challenging. We couldn't read during meal times anymore. So for about, I don't know, 4 to 6 months or so, until Jericho kind of like calmed it down a bit and wasn't like yelling and loud and throwing food everywhere. And I mean, he wasn't throwing food everywhere, but we were doing baby-led weaning, so I mean, food is kind of like getting everywhere. During that time, we just couldn't read, and it was so frustrating. So Samson and I decided to have our own time, and when Daddy would take Jericho upstairs in the evening to let him have some gross motor on the ground, and they would just spend some time together, Samson and I would sit in our recliner, and that we read through Pinocchio, which is a pretty high-level book, but I got the book right now. Barnes & Noble has like a series of books that I've shared it on my Instagram before, but they are like a collection of like the classics like Pinocchio or Little Princess or Robin Hood, but they actually have like some pictures or paintings every other page or every couple of pages. So anyways, that's the one we read, and Pinocchio was pretty like intense and high level, and I didn't really care for that book that much, but anyways, we read that one. And like I said, we're going through the Little House series right now, and I'm losing my daylight. Sorry, it's getting kind of dark, but anyways, yeah, so my main tips are, you know, we don't do screen time. We just, so this is their entertainment. Do something like if your child is working with Play-Doh, or they're playing with their train set, or they're building with Legos, they're painting, maybe if they're taking a bath, if your child's not a loud one like mine are, but your child likes to play in the bathtub, and you can just pull out the book. I mean, just find times when they're doing something to pull out your chapter book, and, you know, just don't have an expectation of how much you can get through. You know, if you only get through a paragraph, that's okay, and slowly build up to it. Now we've gotten to the point where at nap time, I will read out of a chapter book. We're reading Call of the Wild right now, and so I'll read out of a chapter book then, and then sometimes Samson, you know, really wants to hear what's coming up next, so we'll retire to the couch after lunch or dinner, and he'll just sit there, and he enjoys staring out the window while we read, and he'll stare out the window while I read the chapter book. So his mind and his attention has kind of started, it's been trained to now listen to my voice, and of course I try to be quite theatrical while I'm reading, and sometimes I'll do voices, make it really exciting, and if a part's really intense, I'll kind of get quieter, and you know, just make it, entertainment, because that's what books are. And you know, my goal is just to give him to give all my children just a love for reading, and see that reading can take you to a whole other world, and you can be anyone you want and do anything you want when you read. So I hope that this encourages you to, you know, pursue reading maybe higher level books, reading chapter books with your children, and don't just wait until later, because they're ready for it now. So if you liked this video, if you don't mind hitting the like button, and then also subscribing to my channel, and you can comment below with some of your family's favorite books. And thanks for watching, and if you want to look at the description box below, I'll put a couple of posts that you might be interested in that have some of our favorite books. And